Now, I chose individuation for a very particular reason in putting together this package of the 4 pillars of Jungian psychotherapy. It's well known, and Jungians are famous for claiming that they have no techniques and no methodology, that they enter every session fresh and with an open mind, welcoming the material conscious and unconscious of the client, and working with the immediacy of the moment, working in the moment, face to face, in a very interactive, dynamic process with their patients. They do not sit behind the patient. They aren't silent in sessions by and large. They're more interactive, they're more available, more accessible, their personalities are more out there. But one has to admit and keep in mind and be aware that in the back of the analyst's mind there is a roadmap of a psychological development process, a lifelong developmental process, and that the analyst in his or her private moments or reflections might not ever say anything about this to the client, but is thinking it and is making an evaluation and a diagnosis, so to speak, based on it. And that is a map of development that is considered normative for male and female human beings cross-culturally and more or less without exception. Okay, so this is a model of what it is to be human and what it is to develop to the maximum potential as a human being. And the Jungian psychotherapist, in making an assessment, thinking about the client sitting in front of him or her, is asking a question: where does this person fall along the path of individuation, particularly with regard to their current chronological age? So that if a person is 45 years old, one has certain expectations for where that person would be ideally or normatively in their psychological development. If that person is 21 years old, those expectations are different. If the person is 75 years old, still different. Okay, so I want to describe to you what those, what that roadmap looks like, and what's in the back of that Jungian analyst's mind as he or she assesses and thinks about the level of psychological development of that person sitting in front of him or her, because there is an evaluation process. So Jung said in one of his many papers, fairly early one, I think, in the 20s or 30s, that one can think of life as following a trajectory, the trajectory of the sun, where it rises in the east in the morning, it ascends to an apex at noon, and then it begins to descend to the western horizon and sets in the evening. If you take that image, that model, that trajectory as the lifespan, we don't know what happens in the evening. The Egyptians thought that when you die, you go under the world, and there's a big fight with Apophis, the sea monster, and you're reborn the next morning in the east, and you do the journey again. Never mind that. We can observe the sun. We don't know where it goes after it sets. If you take that as the model, Jung suggested that you can divide it into 2 parts. There is the part that is rising and moving upward, and there is the part of the image that is declining and moving downward toward the setting in the west. Now, you could take this as a sort of image for optimism and pessimism. In the first part of the image, you're rising upward and things are getting better and better. In the second, they're declining and going downward and getting worse and worse until it's over. And that's the way a lot of people do think about their lives. I mean, we sort of peak physically when we're 18 or 20. Our brain, I think, reaches its maximum capacity of neuronal power when we're about 18 or 20, and the great mathematicians and physicists often make their marks at a very early age because their thinking is just extremely powerful at that time. Athletes also reach a maximum capacity perhaps between the ages of 18 and 35 in that period, depending on your game. And sometimes they have to stop at the age of 25 or 30. If you're a ballet dancer or a gymnast or something, you aren't going to probably get very far past 25 or 30. If you're a golfer, on the other hand, you probably can make it in pretty good shape into your 40s and 50s, maybe not winning championships anymore, but still having fun at it. But if we use the model of our physical growth and decline, then we are optimistic in the morning and early afternoon, and we become pessimistic as the day goes on and we decline. That isn't exactly what Jung had in mind with that image, I think. What he had in mind was a psychological development that has to do with what he called developing the ego in the first half of life and developing the self in the second half of life. And I want to what do I mean by the phrase maximum potential? I'll say quite a bit more about this as we go along. I think I can give it more detail that way. But basically, what I mean is that when a person comes into this world, a soul, let's say, comes into this world, they come with certain intellectual potentials, they come with certain emotional potentials, they come with certain physical potentials, and they come with certain psychological potentials. And we try to help them, the educational system tries to help them maximize their cognitive potentials. The sports and athletics tries to help them maximize their physical potentials, and therapy tries to help them maximize their psychological potentials. By under psychological potentials, I mean a number of things. I mean the capacity to be with oneself comfortably. I mean the capacity to relate to other people creatively and comfortably. And I mean the capacity ultimately to be oneself, maybe not so comfortably, but nevertheless. Individuation means undividedness, becoming undivided. And as I talk about the developmental process, you'll see how that's so important, because we do get divided into parts. We separate from certain parts of ourselves necessarily at certain stages of development. We leave parts of ourselves behind in order to adapt, in order to grow. And then we have to bring those forward. We have to go back and catch up with ourselves. And this process of bringing ourselves along into our life fully, making the whole self as conscious as possible, and living our various sides and aspects. You can think of typology, your introversion, your extroversion, your capacity to relate to other people, and your capacity to introspect, so on and so forth. Ultimately, the symbol of maximum achieved potential is the mandala, the circle, and I'll speak about that a little bit. The circle that contains all the parts, that is whole, that contains inner and outer conflicts without splitting and breaking, that can contain the maximum amount of information about oneself and the world and hold it together. That's the way I see the goal of individuation. That's it in a nutshell. We'll spell out the details as we go along.